Greetings, members one and all of the Salivation Nation. What is the forecast for gold and silver for 2019? Well, let's find out. But first, we have to look and review what happened in 2018. Gold and silver performed quite underwhelmingly in 2018 for a myriad of reasons, and I think that especially moving up and considering what I had forecast and thought could happen at the end of the year certainly did not take place. And I think in order to understand what's going to happen in 2019, we have to understand why I was wrong for the end of 2018. When a lot of things happened, we had robust economic growth in the country, low unemployment, and business activity. Jobs were picking up, a lot of jobs created, and it's because of that we have also started to see competition for jobs, and in that we've seen wage growth. And with relatively steady inflation, some could credit the Fed interest rate hikes for kind of keeping inflation at that target of 2%. But it also kind of stifled a little bit of economic growth that some think that because of the Fed's actions, we could have seen economic growth increase even more so than it did in 2018. But I think a lot of it goes back to the tax cuts and seeing more real money into the economy in the year 2018. And so we're kind of basking in that. But as we saw with 2018, especially towards the end of 2018, we saw what is the beginnings of a crisis in trade with certain countries and also some other successful negotiation in others. And so that leaves us to where we are at right now at the sunset of 2018 and what could be the potential that we could see in 2019 with gold and silver prices. Because of the economic growth of 2018, gold and silver prices have remained stagnant and even lowered quite substantially, especially for silver. We saw silver go down to under $14 in several brief periods of times. And we saw gold go below $1,200, but never went below $1,100. And because of that, many of us in this community took advantage of those low prices and accumulated some gold and some silver as well. It's a good time to buy. Many believe that silver under $20 is quite the bargain, and I happen to agree. But with that being said, I was under the impression, especially considering what's going on with geopolitical tensions in the world, that we may see prices go up by the end of the year, considering some of the actions of what's known as the BRICS nations and what I thought was going to be increasing tension with Korea. That turned out not to be the case. North Korea has really calmed down a bit, so that geopolitical threat certainly I think is going to help with lower gold and silver prices. But there are some unanswered questions with regards to trade, especially with China, and that's a big one. And I think as we come to the end of 2018, I think that's putting quite a stress and pressure on the markets, and that's going to have an effect leading into the new year, which leaves us to 2019. Where do we go from here in 2019? And that is the question with gold and silver prices. You know, there's a lot of thoughts concerning economic activity in the coming year, and there's a speculation that, you know, the tax cuts, the glow from the tax cuts may wear out into next year, and it depends a lot, I think, of what the Fed does as well. If they're going to continue to raise rates as was previously forecast into 2019, that could put a hamper on the economy, or in a sense possibly even ruin the good economy. But I think a lot of it depends on these trade deals and what happens. There's a lot of growing pains with the trade deals as of late, and that could continue, especially with a new Congress, a Democratic-controlled House in the United States, and other things in relation to what other nations will do in the coming year and what their economies look like. If there is continued economic slowdown in other nations around the world and economic activity is stifled, then I think that could have a drag on the U.S. economy, especially in terms of trade and tariffs and the like, no matter what happens, no matter what deal is reached. But nonetheless, there has been some suggestions from the Fed that there will be a pause in interest rate hikes, at least for next year, even if there is a rate hike in the rest of the month for 2018. So it'll be very interesting to see how it all plays out. But we have to look at the economy and what's going to happen. If the economy does, if there's economic activity and GDP in the United States goes down to under 3% or 2% or what have you, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a recession on the way, because a recession is measured by several different factors, or the warnings of a recession, including the bond market and the like, and yields and other aspects, and anything like that could possibly, and lead to less GDP growth in terms of things like the housing market. And there's a lot of still things going on in the housing market that what essentially caused the crisis of 2007 and 2008. And there's a lot of warning signs out there, and there's some indicators that I've talked to several people in my area and other areas, and they're saying that 2019 there's going to be a lot less activity in terms of housing, and they're bracing for that. And that could have an effect for at least a slowdown. And if we're not careful, it could potentially lead to a crisis situation that we saw last time. Now, how we will manage the next recession, which it is coming, everyone knows, and I've always predicted that no matter who's president, we're going to see another recession. You know, recessions don't necessarily have to be blamed on politics or politicians. You know, the natural source of how things run in the economy, you know, there are economic slowdowns from time to time. And there's a lot of psychology involved in all of this as well. And we really can't blame presidents for a lot of that. You know, for all intents and purposes, here in the United States, we do have a free market, or at least a capitalistic system of some sort. There's too much government involvement even now, even with some of the regulations cut. But by and large, the majority of economic activity is essentially private and free market. And so there is still a lot that is going on in economic activity, the attitudes of Americans and those of us in Western nations where capitalism and free markets play a large role, you know, that come into play. And because of that, you know, there are going to be ebbs and flows in the economic situation. And it's important to understand that, because when there's less economic activity, that means that the precious metals that rely on more on their usage and production in areas like industry, biomedical, and technology fields, such as silver, well, you're going to see less demand for that metal in those areas, because the majority of silver's demand is in the economic sector as a commodity. It has a dual role as a commodity and as a hedge and as a precious metal. And so that could actually cause silver to either remain stagnant in price for 2019, or it could possibly cause the silver price to actually go down if there's a lot of supply in the markets, especially if fuel costs go down. They're going to want to be able to have more supply. Some of it may be held, but it may mean that there's enough silver and there's not as much demand for it that could cause the price to go down. and taking advantage of lower fuel costs to mine it as a byproduct of other metals, that where the demand may be still relatively strong, but probably not as strong, as such as copper, nickel, and the like. Gold, I believe, with the economic activity, a lot of it is dependent on other things, oil price, the strength of the dollar, and it is treasured more. Gold is treasured and held more. So my guess is it may not have as much effect on the gold price, which means that the ratio to gold to silver could actually increase. We may see 100-to-1 gold ratio in 2019. But I believe with that being the case, we could see gold either remain stagnant in its price or go up. My guess is it's going to go up in 2019. And I will say that by the end of 2019, we may see it come close to $1,400 an ounce, which is a prediction I made for the end of 2013. Again, this is just for fun. I don't hedge. I don't stake any bets on it. I'm not, I don't care if I'm wrong. It's just what I think could possibly happen. In fact, in some cases, I hope I am wrong because I want to accumulate more. Silver, I don't have as bright a forecast for in terms of its price going up in 2019 substantially, if what I said earlier remains or happens to be true, in terms of a less demand for it, especially if there's an economic downturn. So if there's a slight economic downturn or a stagnant economy, I believe we'll see silver actually remain stagnant in price along with the economy, or go down in price. Even if there's a recession, if there is an actual recession in 2019, both metals may have a delayed reaction in terms of what they do. Just like what we saw in 2007 and 2008. It was quite a little while before we saw them go up. But depending on the timing of when that recession happens, and depending on the severity therein, will help gauge as far as where the medium-term price structure for gold and silver will play out. We may see new lows or a new bottom for gold and silver, and it'll be much higher than where it is now for both metals if there's a recession, even if it's delayed by several months to a year before we see those price increases. But it's going to be fascinating to see where 2019 leads us in terms of precious metals and the pricing therein. But the reason why I chose these two coins to illustrate the point is because of the dragons and China. And I think China, the dragons are important, are so important in Chinese culture. And as far as the lunar series, we're going to be beginning a new lunar year next year. It's not going to be the year of the dragon, but nonetheless, it's going to be fascinating to see where things play out with China and the role they play, especially with trade and production and the yuan. The renminbi as a currency, I think, will be something to watch in 2019, and how it plays and how the role will play as part of the breadbasket of currencies, and where things play out. On the geopolitical stage, I think China is the nation to watch by far, and especially now that things have been ruffled in terms of trade. This is something that's been really never been tackled in the way it's been tackled under President Trump. So we'll see how things play out with China and where they go from there. But regardless, we, as members of this community, and those of you watching this video that are interested in precious metals for the coming year, 2019, I believe it's a good time for us to continue to move on with these metals and to accumulate as we can. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Post your thoughts below for your forecast for 2019. I would like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for watching and encourage you to please rate, comment, and subscribe.